Oh, guys, I'm going to be getting a lot of hate from the MMA community after this video. And hopefully, with the facts that are being presented, you guys will have the same opinion as I do. Do you guys think the Korean Zombie is overrated, aka Chan Sung Jung? The facts says he is, but the MMA masses and MMA journalists and MMA analysts and experts have him as this legend, have him as this Don. But I took a closer look at the facts and I just don't see what everyone else is seeing. The journalists and masses are way too nice. They're way too nice. I'm the one that has to pull everyone back into reality and help people understand that, hey, yeah, this guy is a warrior for sure, but he ain't who y'all saying he is. I mean, he made his debut at, a long time ago, 2007. And he was in the WEC for a minute. His first fight in the WEC, his first fight on U.S. soil was a loss. But let's not forget what made him a superstar and what gave him his nickname was his first fight against Leonard Garcia in WEC. I mean, it was a good fight. Probably one of the best fights in WEC history. And he lost by split decision. He then lost to George Roop. And then the UFC bought out the WEC, their sister company, and were able to get a lot of their lower weight class fighters into the promotion. Chan Sung Jung being one of them. So what was his first fight in the UFC? Why not book one of the greatest WEC fights ever in Leonard Garcia? Make his first fight a rematch. It should be absolute fireworks. Let's just do it again. And not only was it fireworks, but Chan Sung Jung made some history. Pulled off the first ever twister submission in UFC history. And this was way back in 2011. And it was unlike anything we've ever seen. I remember watching and being like, wow, I've never seen that before. This guy could be for real. He could make some waves in the division. And not only that, he kind of left no doubt from that first good fight he had against Leonard Garcia. So he was already on the rise with that spectacular unseen finish that he had. So he then goes and fights Mark Hominick at UFC 140. Mark Hominick fought Jose Aldo. Actually almost finished that fight against Jose Aldo at UFC 129 in Canada, UFC 129 2011. He almost beat Jose Aldo. Round 5 was dangerously close to being stopped, but Jose Aldo landed up coming out on top with a unanimous decision victory. I can't talk today, guys. I'm sorry. So Mark Hominick is the real deal. Former title challenger, this is a big step up for Chan Sung Jung since he somewhat made his mark. Made a pretty big splash in the UFC. He knocks out Mark Hominick in 7 seconds. One of the fastest knockouts in UFC history. Up there with Todd Duffy versus Tim Hague. Up there versus Dwayne Bane Ludwig against Jonathan Goulet. So he's already made UFC history twice with an unknown submission and one of the fastest knockouts in UFC history. You can't even call him the Korean Zombie because he's not even showing he's a zombie because he's out here dominating people in extremely devastating fashion. Then his first true win of note, was against Dustin Poirier, a guy, WC alumni, choked him out via Darce choke. And we all know Dustin Poirier is not no easy guy to beat on any given day. And Zombie proved why his name was a zombie because that fight is war. I would recommend, if you are new to the MMA community and you're new to watching MMA, I suggest you go watch that fight because it is truly one of the best fights out there. Probably top 50 best fights, Korean Zombie versus Dustin Poirier. So he's on the rise. He's on the rise. He's making waves. He's making moves. He's doing good. He's beating all the guys that honestly should beat him. He then takes the rest of 2012 off and then gets gifted a title shot after Anthony Pettis got hurt against Jose Aldo. Remember when that was booked? Anthony Pettis was supposed to fight Jose Aldo, UFC 163 in Brazil, 2013. Pettis got hurt, had to pull out, so why not put the Korean Zombie in for his place? Fans were chomping at the bit for that fight. You got the Korean Zombie versus one of the greatest featherweights of all time, one of the best pound-for-pound fighters of all time that night, in that time. But this is when the aura of the Korean Zombie really started to get tainted and really started to get a black eye. he fought Jose Aldo and didn't really put up much of a fight. You could chalk it up to Jose Aldo being that good. You could chalk it up to Korean Zombie not ready for the moment, not ready because he's still so young and so green in the fight game. You could chop it up to that. But with his name and with his toughness, that alone should be able to carry him to at least a better outing. Sure, he tore his shoulder in the 4th round, and that led to the fight being stopped. I get that. Injuries happen in the fight game. But as far as the fight win itself, he didn't put up a fight. He didn't. He got absolutely annihilated. And I did not expect that. I was really disappointed in the performance of the Korean Zombie that night, August 3rd, 2013. Really upset. But we all thought, okay, he's had some pretty big wins. Let's get him back. Let's see if he could get the momentum back, and let's see if he can get back to a world title shot. Then the craziest thing happened. All men in Korea were basically, they were mandatorily advised to be in the army. They had to go into the army. They had to go and fight a war. I don't even remember what war it was for, but like a true gangster he is, he went and fought for his country. All the praise on him for that. I condemn the Korean Zombie for being a gangster like that and fighting for his country. For that, he will forever have my respect. So he doesn't fight at all for 2014, doesn't fight at all in 2015, and doesn't fight at all in 2016. We didn't know if he would ever come back. So now he comes back. There were rumblings he would come back this month. He would come back this year. None of that happened until the end of 2016, where he was announced to fight Dennis Bermudez. Not exactly a world beater, because Dennis Bermudez was on a win streak. It got snapped in November 2014, It got snapped, and he was in this weird phase of his career where he's still trying to find himself, trying to rebuild himself. And it was a good fight for Korean Zombie. Good fight to get his beak wet after having such a long layoff. So give him a top hungry contender. Not only top hungry contender, but a guy that's still, like I said, trying to find himself, trying to get back on track. Korean Zombie knocked him out in devastating fashion. It was a heroic performance by the Korean Zombie. Landed a beautiful right uppercut. Landed a beautiful right uppercut, and he was back. The Korean Zombie was back. And talks of a title shot began to rumble day after day. 2018 came around, and he didn't fight at all the rest of 2017. So 2018 came around, and he was supposed to fight Frankie Edgar at the UFC's 25th anniversary show, November 10th, Denver, Colorado, one of the biggest fight nights ever on free TV. Frankie Edgar had to pull out, though. In comes Yair Rodriguez on about 3 weeks' notice, I would say, give or take. I was there. I watched it. I was literally almost front row. I had a very good seat that night, and I watched that entire fight live. This is where the controversy and why I think the Zombie is overrated. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but let me just tell you what I'm about to say. Korean Zombie was winning every second of that Yair Rodriguez fight. Every second. Won almost every single round. And basically got caught at the end. Literally, every exchange was a Zombie. Everywhere the fight went was a Korean Zombie. It was almost a 10-7, 10-8 round every single round. But 1 second, Yair Rodriguez landed an elbow like this on Korean Zombie as he was lunging in for one final sequence, one final stamp. Korean Zombie comes back, wins 2 fights in a row, and he gets knocked out. Right in front of me, right where I was sitting. I couldn't believe what I just saw. It was mind-boggling. One of the latest finishes in UFC history, along with Demetrius Johnson finishing Kyoji Horiguchi. It was unreal, unheard of. I'm like, yo, I get your name's a Zombie, but dude, you're winning. You kind of got to stay away right there. Not even lunge in. That just shows the creativity of Yair Rodriguez. Truly insane. Man, I couldn't believe it. So 2019 rolls around. He beats Renato Moicano, who's not a world beater. I don't think he's ever cracked the top 10 in the UFC at all. But again, He's not a prominent guy in the division. He gets back on track with that Renato Moicano victory. Then he fights the guy he was supposed to fight that night. He fought Yair Rodriguez in Frankie Edgar. And let's be honest, it was an aging Frankie Edgar. It's not the Frankie Edgar from 2014. Hell, it's not even the Frankie Edgar from 2013. It is an old and aging Frankie Edgar. And at this point in his career, I hate to say this, but who hasn't beat Frankie Edgar? I mean, Corey Sandhagen had an amazing knockout against Frankie Edgar. He's old. He's getting up there. He's long in the tooth. That shouldn't be that big of a feather in the Zombie's cap. So he closes out 2019 with 2 wins. Mediocre wins. Then 2020 rolls around and he fights Brian Ortega in October of that year. They were supposed to fight numerous times here and there, and it didn't materialize. But now we finally get the fight we were oh so desperately waiting for. Big fight. The winner will go on and get a shot at the title. Zombie froze like a deer in the headlights. Brian Ortega put on an absolute clinic in an area of mixed martial arts that is not Brian Ortega's bread and butter. When you think of Brian Ortega, you think of his nickname. You think of T-City. You think of triangles. You think of guillotines. You think of every submission in the book. You don't think of Brian Ortega, the boxer. You don't think of Brian Ortega, the experienced Muay Thai expert. You don't think of Brian Ortega, the improving boxer. You don't think of anything like that. You think if this fight was a true stand-up fight, it would go to the Zombie. And I don't even think the fight touched the ground. And Zombie got outclassed. Outclassed. So that is 3 times in big fights where he gets smoked or absolutely flatlined. He got smoked against Aldo. He got flatlined against Rodriguez. And he got smoked against Ortega. And let's not forget, Ortega went on to fight for the title after. So it was definitely a huge fight in the career for Zombies. And he couldn't even put up that big of a fight against Ortega. It was mind-boggling to see that the Zombie, this guy that people are hyping up, and this guy that they're calling a legend, not win the big fights and not win the fights that he's supposed to win. Very frustrating. Then he goes on, defeats Dan Ige, Dan the Man. You know, it's a win. And then goes on and fights Volkanovski for the title a year later in 2022. Got gifted a title shot just because of his namesake. And didn't put up a fight. Got smoked. Got outclassed. And it's not like he has any excuse as to why he had such a shitty performance. He had a full training camp. He had about 7 weeks to train for Volkanovski. And didn't put up a fight. Again, you can be a casual analyst and just chalk it up to Volkanovski being that good. But Korean Zombie is a number 4 ranked guy in the world. You would think he would put up a way better fight in his 2 title outings than ever before. But no, he just didn't do that. So let me break it down for you now. Had that great fight with Leonard Garcia in WEC. I summarized his UFC tenure a bit. Now it's time for me to lay out the facts. Had that great fight in WEC with Leonard Garcia. Cool. That got his name into stardom, like I said. Then he has that twister submission. Great. Beats Mark Hominick in 7 seconds. Even better. Former title challenger. Then he fights Aldo. Puts up a terrible outing. Well, you could chalk it up to being young, but his nickname is the Korean Zombie. You at least got to put up a better fight. Goes, fights War. All the respect in the world. Salute to Zombie for that. Comes back and beats Dennis Bermudez, a struggling featherweight at the time. If he beat the Dennis Bermudez on that crazy win streak, I think he went on a 7-fight win streak. Had he had been the one to beat Dennis Bermudez on that win streak, I'd give him more props. But it was against a guy that's been on the ups and downs of his career and really trying to figure out what his place is in the world of mixed martial arts and what his place is in the featherweight division. So, a fine made matchup for Korean Zombie, but not a top-level guy. Goes on. 2018, fights Yair. You got to win that fight. You can't get knocked out with 1 second left. I'm sorry. So that's 2 big fights where he gets totally exposed. Goes on and beats Renato Moicano. We're not going to I'm pretty sure no one thinks Hanato Moicano is going to be in the title talk the next 2 to 3 years. Not at all. Then beats Frankie Edgar, whom, like I said, long in the tooth and old. If it was the Frankie Edgar of 2013, I give him way more props and say that is a huge, huge victory for the Korean Zombie. Then loses to Brian Ortega. You got to win that fight. I don't see how you cannot win that fight, get absolutely dominated. I don't even see how you put up that big of a fight. Like, how do you not? It pisses me off to say this. It pains me to say this, but dude, you got to put up a better fight at least. Sure, you win some and lose some, but your name's a zombie and you're going to get 50-45 on all three judges' scorecards? Come on. Then goes on and beats Dan the Man Ige. I'm pretty sure we're not going to be talking about Dan Ige being in the featherweight title talk anytime soon. He himself comes up short in big fights. The guys that Korean Zombie has beaten are not top tier guys. And when he has big fights, he loses badly. I hate to say this, and it pains me to say this, but these are the facts that presents itself. The only legitimate win that he has is probably against Dustin Poirier. 1 out of 24 fights he's had. One legitimate win, and that was against a young Dustin Poirier. This wasn't even the Dustin Poirier that got knocked out against Conor McGregor. This is an even younger Dustin Poirier. So you can kind of discredit that win. But at the end of the day, guys, it's not like he's been in wars. He's been in boring fights, and those boring fights were fights where he got his ass whooped. Again, those 3 big fights that he had, 4 big fights you could say. Aldo got smoked. Rodriguez got flatlined with 1 second left in a fight that he was dominating. 3rd fight, Brian Ortega, title eliminator, a fight that you got to win or at least put up a better fight. And 4th time was the Alexander Volkanovski fight this past weekend, where he had almost a full training camp and only landed about 23 significant strikes. If that doesn't scream overrated, I don't know what does. I know he has a nation behind him in the entire nation of Korea. There's never been a Korean champion before. But Do-ho Choi is a perfect example. He was on the come up, beating all the guys that aren't considered title contenders or world beaters. And then he fights one legitimate guy in Cub Swanson and loses. Sure, it was one of the greatest fights in UFC history and is going in the UFC Hall of Fame for the fight wing. But where have we heard from him since? We haven't. And it's going to be the same with Korean Zombie. You can make the argument he is one of the best title fights, one of the best fighters to never win a title, but I've seen better guys. And for the wins that Korean Zombie has, they're very illegitimate. Very illegitimate. He's beating guys that will probably never fight for a world title. And the one guy he has was very, very young. So like I said, I hate to say this, but the Korean Zombie is overrated.